I'd now like to introduce Dr. Alistair Harkness from Federation University. Dr. Harkness is a senior lecturer and program leader of criminal justice at Fed Uni's Gippsland campus, located east of Melbourne, where he teaches both undergraduate and postgraduate students. Between 2002 and 2010, he was a member of Victoria's Legislative Assembly. Before entering Parliament, he taught Australian politics and police studies at Monash University. Dr. Harkness's primary research interests are in farm and rural crime, with a particular emphasis on crime prevention and rural policing responses. He leads the Federation University Victorian Farm Crime Research Project, which is focusing on advancing knowledge of agricultural crime. Dr. Harkness was lead editor of Locating Crime in Context and Place, published in 2016, and is currently editing another book on rural crime prevention, which will be published in 2020. He's the inaugural secretary of the new International Society for the Study of Rural Crime and is proud to be a board member of the UNE Centre for Rural Criminology. Dr. Harkness's talk tonight is titled Farm Crime Prevention in 21st Century Australia. Welcome, Dr. Harkness.
Well, thank you very much for that warm introduction, and could I start as well by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country, elders past and present, and particularly acknowledge Uncle Colin. Important too, I think, is to acknowledge those representatives of the university here today, from the Vice-Chancellor, Bridget Haywood, to the professors here, other members of the academic community, particularly to Glenn and Kyle for all of the fantastic effort that they have put in establishing this centre. Other distinguished guests, including our representatives of New South Wales Police, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. Perhaps if I can start by taking you back to a wintry day in 1984 at the Frankston Heights Primary School. An old pink portable. I was in grade 4, I'll give away my age a little bit there. On this particular day, there was a bit of a commotion at the entrance, at the door to this portable, and all of us were obviously curious as to what was going on. And with a flourish, up bumped the steps of the portable the principal and the deputy principal of the school. And they had a box on a trolley that they then wheeled into the centre of the room, upon which we all gathered in a circle. With a flourish, off came the cover, and sitting on that table, or that trolley, was an Apple IIe computer. Very, very important at the time, so expensive we never got to see it again. A lot has changed since that point in time, and both the presentations from Gary and again particularly from Bridget, the changing in technology which has occurred through society. You know, holding in our pockets on a daily basis greater amount of power than used in some of those space programs. All of the different positive uses for technology, the negative uses as well. But one thing hasn't changed over that course of time, and hasn't for generations, hasn't for eons, and Gary highlighted this. It's the will of some people to offend. And what I'm particularly interested in is investigating and researching those ways that we can use technology, we can improve policy, we can improve practice to try to overcome some of those really negative and ill effects of offending against rural communities and particularly farmers. Okay, let's just start with the myth and see if we can just quickly dispel that. For centuries, there's been this notion that crime occurs in urban settlements, that the cities, the great unwashed inhabit those, that is where the offending occurs, and outside of the city boundaries is this romantic, idyllic countryside where crime doesn't occur. And that has been assisted and aided and abetted over a period of time by the concentration of academics and scholars and researchers focused in urban environments, focusing on those particular things. And I think that's why it's so important that this centre is being established, re-established, and involving partnerships. Those important partnerships between researchers, academics, members of the community, members of policing and other criminal justice organisations, and of course the communities as well. We know that the economic and social impacts in rural and regional Australia are immense and enormous. And that particularly too is contributed to reporting rates, which I'll get to in a moment, in a few slides' time. This so-called the dark figure of crime. We know that the crime is occurring, and yet it's not all being reported. right? So how do we overcome that? How do we encourage greater reporting so that our policy makers, our key and central decision makers allocate the resources to where they're needed, which is actually reflected in the crime statistics and the other information upon which decisions are made by government and by other organisations. So more on that shortly. Agriculture is fundamentally important to the Australian economy. 2% contributes to 2% of our gross domestic product. It has an enormous amount of employment. 250,000 people involved directly in agriculture, let alone all of the other people in associated industries throughout the country. So it is very, very important. And when crime occurs in rural communities, and particularly against farmers, it not only impacts those farmers and their families personally, the wider communities within those areas as well, but of course also has a direct financial impact on state and federal governments as well. Why do I tell you this? Because it's important, and it's important that we make sure that our decision makers, our policy makers, the resource allocators are as equally aware of the offending which is happening in rural communities as those in rural communities know it to be, so that we can shape policy and practice. Okay, what do we know from previous research? Well, it's a little bit sketchy. In fact, the professor indicated that I'm in the throes of pulling together an edited collection on rural crime prevention. And as I've been going through over the last couple of months and editing the different contributions from people all over the world, one thing strikes me as almost uniform in those contributions. Each of the chapters which has been presented finishes with some sort of lament that there is not enough empirical research onto all these different types of crimes which might be happening in rural areas. And almost a call to arms to people out in the research community, in academia, in scholarship, to come and do something about this so that we can make evidence-based decisions which are going to improve communities and improve society more generally. What we do know is that victimisation is high amongst farmers, and it is particularly and acutely felt at certain periods of time, and particularly during drought as well. We have some state-based research, but we do not have any contemporary research which takes into account those circumstances which are happening across the country in the year 2019. There is a little bit too much information on this to go by, and I think that people will storm the stage if I go over my allocated 15 or 20 minutes, and I know that Kyle certainly will, so I'll keep the comments on this to a minimum. There are certain factors which are experienced in rural communities which are not necessarily present in urban ones. And perhaps if we can just highlight just one or two of those for you here today. This notion that things will be right, she'll be apples, not locking up machinery and tools and equipment, not just because it might be very difficult to get round and lock up 30 different gates every single day, but I haven't ever had to do that. The farmers before me haven't, other generations haven't done that either. Why would I need to? And the simple answer to that is that this is now 2019. The offenders are getting better organised. They are targeting properties. The distances between urban settlements and rural ones are getting shorter, double-lane freeways, faster road connections and so on and so forth. So rural communities are now much more accessible for either those opportunistic thieves or for those who are targeting particular farms. Some of the geographic and evidence-based factors as well. The tyranny of distance between properties and not necessarily having that ability to see what's going on at another part of your farm at any one time. Some of the specific crime prevention behaviours as well, and the last one perhaps I'll focus on. Tractors and machinery which are key to life, and I recall this interesting anecdote from one of the farmers who replied to one of my surveys, and he knew of in his local community a bloke who had just bought a hobby farm. And with that hobby farm came a John Deere tractor, but unfortunately the tractor was present but no key for it. So the hobby farmer, his first time out on the land, he dutifully takes the time to write down all the serial numbers that he could possibly find on this, takes the time and effort, gets down to the John Deere dealership, reels off all these numbers, and the bloke behind the counter points to the shoebox at the end and says, "Help yourself to a key." Right. These are not factors which we'd see in urban settlements where we all have our fob keys, and stealing a late model Holden Commodore is much more difficult than a tractor which is keyed alike. In the United Kingdom, that is starting to change with point of sale changes like tracking devices and so on and so forth being installed in those items of machinery. I referenced earlier this issue about reporting and some of the reasons why farmers and others in rural communities will not report. Sadly, there are some people, and successive studies, including those from Elaine Barclay, who was up until last year a senior academic here at the University of New England. Other research as well would indicate that sometimes farmers don't think that they're getting the best possible service from law enforcement. That they'll have a negative experience with the constable or the leading constable who might come to their property, and that has then had an impact on their impressions and their perceptions as well. What we also know, though, is that in those communities which have dedicated rural policing presences, when there's been those interactions, their perceptions will go markedly up. So there is a growing amount of research that indicates that those, as with here in New South Wales, the rural crime investigators, it is actually paying dividends both here and elsewhere around the world as well. So some of those institutional issues, some of the evidence-based issues, mustering the sheep every only 4 or 5 times a year perhaps for drenching, for counting, for shearing, not knowing when the actual crime occurred, not having any evidence. It might have rained, there might have been a dust storm, any evidence is lost. Can't be sure that it wasn't the next door neighbour that's put the sheep into the chest freezer either. Knowing that, and that leading on to the third thing, some of those community issues, a fear of revenge. I have to live next door to this guy even though I know that he's been knocking my stuff off. So some of those issues will contribute to the non-reporting. But I just circle back to that issue. If we have, as Elaine Barclay's research from 2001 and then again in 2014 indicated, 49 on the first occasion and 50% on the second occasion of farmers who indicated that they had been victimised did not report that theft. My own research indicates that in 92% of cases where people have reported something having been stolen, it was never recovered. So what can we do about this? First of all, we have to recognise that there needs to be a partnership approach. I've done a study of both residents within urbanised communities on residential burglary and asked the very same questions to those of farmers throughout country Victoria. And as you can see on the slide, those urban residents indicated that people, i.e. they themselves, need to take personal responsibility for crime prevention, which was greater than those of farmers. And preventing job, posed with the prompt that preventing crime is the job of police, less farmers than residential burglary residents strongly agreed with that statement. So there is some recognition in rural communities that there needs to be some personal responsibility and also that it's not just the job of police. What can police and communities do? A number of things. Briefly, in West Mercia in the United Kingdom, they have a number of different programs. The Stop That Thief program is like a try before you buy crime prevention program where a crime prevention officer will come to a property with a representative of an insurance, the National Farmers Association, do an audit, install a number of different prevention measures, and if after a month the farmer or the residents think that that is something that they'd like to retain, they can purchase those items of equipment. There is insurance premium relief. So if you install a number of different types of items, you can pay that off over a period of time through reduced insurance premiums. Covert operations take place, massive PR campaigns with signage galore. In terms of some of those practical communication mechanisms between communities and police through dedicated rural crime teams, traditional media, social media. We've got a picture up there of the North Wales Rural Crime Team. Now, admittedly, a small policing team, but they do Twitter particularly well. And I had the opportunity to go round with them just a year or two ago, and we pull up outside country pubs or coffee shops and strips. They get their phones out and log into the free Wi-Fi network on that little stretch of the street, send messages. So informing their communities, but also informing the crooks as well that they are omnipresent. They are all over the place. So some clever and strategic actions which can occur, all aimed at achieving greater awareness, better education, crime prevention measures being implemented, resilience, and engaging that active citizenry, which is so important, not just believing that it's somebody else's responsibility. That importance of partnerships, those partnership approaches between communities, police and other organisations as well. High visibility campaigns too, and here's just some examples from a couple of different police organisations. They take these tractors out to country shows and really a bit of attention seeking to make sure that people will come and engage with those the professional police doing hard work each and every day and sharing information and receiving it as well. Just in the last couple of minutes, if I can just turn our attention to some of the practical measures which farmers themselves might take. Just 5 seconds of Crime Prevention 101. If you want to do something about preventing crime, it's recognising that offenders will make rational choices in many instances. So, is there going to be a reward for the risk entered into? Will it be easier to go down the street and steal from Joe, who doesn't have any crime prevention measures in place and is hardly ever there, or Bob, who has a litany of things present on his property? And generally speaking, if the risk is too high and the reward is too low, then the offending might be deterred. So what we need to ensure is that there is an increasing effort for the offender, increased risk, and reducing the reward for the offending. And we can do that through greater vigilance, whether it's in electronic means or having neighbours looking out for each other, the so-called capable guardianship, and implementing a range of other crime prevention measures. An array of old school, easy, and oftentimes cheap measures to make it more difficult for the crime to occur, for the offender to get away with it. Looking out for neighbours, setting up WhatsApp groups, speaking of technology, which I know that some farming communities do. I was out in Warrnambool a year or so ago, and all the dairy farmers, and particularly the young dairy farmers, setting up WhatsApp groups to communicate with each other. There's a white van coming door to door. Just be aware. I think they're up to no good. Spreading that message, looking out for each other. Having a permanent or a random presence on farms, being physically present, installing cameras and other technologies as well. Marking property, and this could just be old school property etching. I remember, give me a vigorous wind up if I'm getting over time. I remember years ago, Victoria Police used to have a scheme where you could school kids could take their bikes down to the local police station and have the etching done on their bike, so that there was some sort of physical marking. And that can still occur with quad bikes, chainsaws, other machinery which is easily knocked off. Cremark is a product that was invented by a former police officer in the United Kingdom, and again, it's just about putting a physical marking onto property to aid in identifying who it belongs to and hopefully returning it to its rightful owner. But there are a number of different technological options as well in terms of crime prevention. So installing security lights and alarms, having guard cameras, having motion activated cameras of a good quality so that it does produce some evidence for police as well, coupled with signage and other warning devices as well, to ensure that the crooks know that risk of offending is going to be greater than another target perhaps as well. And traceable liquid property marking, which is used extensively through the United Kingdom. A couple of different products, Smart Water, Selector DNA, This is about using highly sophisticated, individually identifiable but invisible property marking onto a whole range of different products. And I can talk to you more about that afterwards if you have a particular interest in that. In terms of livestock marking, a couple of different products as well in the United Kingdom, and I know we have some representatives from Cerastag here today, a Queensland-based company with a presence here in New South Wales, who are doing some great things around geofencing and identifying livestock too. So a whole range of different types of products, sophisticated technologies which can be used to combat a problem to identify property. And just the last bit, a little bit of technology, security fogging, which is used, generally speaking, in high-end retail stores, jewellery stores as well. Once the device is activated, within about 8 seconds, the entire space is filled with a big, thick cloud of non-toxic fog. It means the offender can't see where they're going and will try to grapple for an exit. That means, in this particular example, getting that quad bike out of the barn is going to be impossible, to say the least. Lastly, there is a role for government and for police command as well. New South Wales is very fortunate that it's had some very, very strong leadership and setting up this dedicated rural crime investigation team. Not every state has gone down that track, and there is an intensive effort in my home state of Victoria to convince the Minister and other senior members of police that there is some world's best practice going on, and some of that world's best practice is not that very far away from the state of Victoria. And perhaps there might be some encouragement to come and see Gary and some other people to just see firsthand how well it is going in a state like New South Wales. Making sure that those hard-working rural country cops actually have the resource that they need to go and do their job properly, to engage with communities, to fight crime, but importantly as well, prevent it from happening in the first place. Just because no presentation on policing or crime prevention would be complete without referencing the former Home Secretary and the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, not the mop-head one at the moment, but an older one, Sir Robert Peel, who said two things out of 9 different precepts that he had. The first, the principal object to be attained is the prevention of crime. To this great and every effort of the police is to be directed. And importantly too, the second precept that I wanted to highlight, the ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent upon public approval of police actions. 2 very important principles, highly relevant to not only urban communities but to rural communities as well. Hopefully I've managed in this short period of time to shed some light on just a couple of those emerging issues and give you a little bit of food for thought. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been a pleasure.